Detective Rebecca Chen had been counting down the days to this Saturday morning for what felt like forever. After 3 months of non-stop cases, endless paperwork, and dealing with city council meetings that seemed to drag on until midnight, she finally had a chance to take her brand new fishing boat out on the water. The boat wasn't anything fancy, but it was hers. A clean white 20-footer with a reliable motor that she'd saved up for over 2 years. Every overtime shift, every skipped dinner out, every vacation day she'd cashed in instead of taking had gone toward this moment. As the police chief of Riverside, a mid-sized town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business, Rebecca rarely got time to herself. This boat represented freedom, peace, and maybe even a chance to catch her dinner instead of grabbing fast food on the way home from another 14-hour day. She'd moved into Lakeside Estates just 12 weeks ago, drawn by the quiet neighborhood and the promise of easy boat access to Crystal Lake. The community looked perfect in the brochures, with its tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, and that beautiful marina where residents could launch their boats without dealing with crowded public ramps. What the real estate agent hadn't mentioned was the homeowners association that seemed to run the place like a small military operation. Rebecca backed her pickup truck down the boat ramp, taking her time to get everything lined up just right. The morning was perfect. Not a cloud in the sky, barely any wind, and the lake was so still it looked like glass. She could already picture herself anchored in some quiet cove, coffee in one hand and a fishing rod in the other, with nothing but the sound of water lapping against the boat. That peaceful image shattered the moment she heard the clicking of high heels on concrete. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Rebecca looked up to see a woman marching toward her like she was heading into battle. The woman was probably in her 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair that didn't move despite the morning breeze. She wore a bright pink tracksuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and she clutched a thick folder against her chest like it contained state secrets. The woman's name tag read, Patricia Stevens, HOA Board President. But in everything about her screamed, person who calls the manager. Her expression suggested she'd caught Rebecca in the act of committing some terrible crime against humanity. "I'm launching my boat," Rebecca replied calmly, continuing to back the trailer toward the water. "Beautiful morning for it." "Oh, I don't think so." Patricia planted herself directly behind the boat trailer, forcing Rebecca to stop. "This marina is exclusively for Lakeside Estates residents, and I can tell you right now that I don't recognize you or that vessel." Rebecca put the truck in park and stepped out, keeping her expression neutral. 15 years in law enforcement had taught her that escalating situations rarely ended well for anyone involved. "I am a resident. I bought the house at 1247 Oak Ridge Drive about 3 months ago." Patricia's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. "Impossible. I personally review every home sale in this community, and there's been no one new on Oak Ridge Drive since the Hendersons moved to Florida last Christmas. Well, I hate to break it to you, but the Hendersons sold to me in June." Rebecca reached into her truck and pulled out a folder of her own. "I've got all the paperwork right here if you'd like to see it. Deed, HOA, registration, the whole 9 yards. But Patricia was already shaking her head before Rebecca could open the folder. "Anyone can print fake documents these days. Do you have any idea how many scammers try to use our facilities? Just last month, some teenager tried to convince me he lived here so he could use our tennis courts." Rebecca blinked slowly. "You think I'm a scammer?" "Ma'am, I'm 42 years old. I drive a pickup truck that's seen better days, and I'm trying to launch a fishing boat at 7 in the morning. What exactly am I scamming you out of?" "Access to our premium facilities." Patricia's voice was getting louder now, and Rebecca noticed a few other early morning joggers starting to slow down and stare. "Our marina access alone adds $15,000 to property values. We can't just let anyone waltz in here and take advantage of amenities they haven't paid for." Rebecca took a deep breath and reminded herself that losing her temper wouldn't solve anything. "Look, Mrs. Stevens, I understand you're trying to protect your community. That's admirable, but I really am a resident here and I really would like to launch my boat. How about I give you my real estate agent's number? She can verify everything." Patricia crossed her arms and tapped one manicured nail against her folder. "Real estate agents lie all the time. They'll say anything to close a deal. For all I know, you're working with some con artist who sold you fake papers." "Okay, then what would convince you? What kind of proof would you accept?" "Official verification from the county records office a notarized copy of your deed with proper seals, and approval from our architectural review committee for any watercraft you plan to keep on the premises. Patricia rattled off the requirements, like she'd memorized them for exactly this type of situation. Rebecca glanced at her watch. The county office wouldn't open until Monday, and she had no idea what an architectural review committee even was, let alone how to get their approval. Mrs. Stevens, with respect, those are pretty high hurdles for launching a boat on a Saturday morning. I just want to go fishing. Rules are rules, Patricia declared with the satisfaction of someone who'd never met a regulation she didn't love. If you can't follow proper procedures, then you don't belong in Lakeside Estates. Rebecca looked around the marina, noting the dozen or so other boats already in the water or tied up at the docks. Did all these other boat owners go through your architectural review process? Every single one. We maintain strict standards here. Patricia's chin lifted proudly. It's what separates us from those public boat ramps where anyone can show up and cause trouble. The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca that she spent most of her working life dealing with actual troublemakers, and here she was being treated like a criminal for wanting to use a facility she'd paid for. But arguing with Patricia clearly wasn't getting her anywhere. Tell you what, Rebecca said, pulling out her phone. Let me call my neighbor. Maybe if someone can vouch for me, we can work this out. But Patricia was already pulling out her own phone. I'm calling my husband. He'll know what to do about this situation. Rebecca watched with growing disbelief as Patricia speed-dialed someone while keeping her eyes locked on Rebecca, like she might try to make a run for it. The whole thing was so absurd that Rebecca almost laughed. In her career, she'd dealt with armed robberies, domestic disputes, and even a few actual boat thefts. But somehow this middle-aged woman in a pink tracksuit was treating her like public enemy number one. Harold? Yes, it's me. I need you down at the marina right now. We have a situation. Patricia's voice carried clearly in the morning air. Some woman is trying to launch an unauthorized boat and she's got fake paperwork. Bring the camera and call the other board members. This could be big. Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment and counted to 10. When she opened them, Patricia was still there, still glaring, still clutching that folder like it contained the secrets of the universe. The perfect morning Rebecca had planned was officially ruined, but something told her this was just the beginning of a very long day. Harold Stevens arrived at the marina in record time, which told Rebecca everything she needed to know about how seriously this couple took their self-appointed roles as neighborhood guardians. He pulled up in a silver sedan that looked like it had never seen a speck of dirt, and stepped out wearing khakis so perfectly pressed they could probably cut glass. Harold was clearly Patricia's perfect match. Where she was all sharp angles and aggressive energy, he moved with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent his career dotting every I and crossing every T. He carried a professional-looking camera and what appeared to be an official incident report form, as if documenting unauthorized boat launches was just another Tuesday for him. Honey, this is the woman I told you about, Patricia announced, pointing at Rebecca like she was identifying a suspect in a lineup. She claims she lives on Oak Ridge Drive, but obviously that's impossible. Harold adjusted his glasses and studied Rebecca with the intensity of someone conducting a criminal investigation. Ma'am, I'm Harold Stevens, Vice President of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. I understand you're attempting to use our facilities without proper authorization. Rebecca had to admire their commitment to the whole official procedure thing, even if it was completely ridiculous. Mr. Stevens, I'm trying to launch my boat because I live here and I thought that gave me the right to use the marina. Apparently, I was wrong about how simple that would be. Nothing about community management is simple, Harold replied seriously, pulling out a small notebook. Can you provide me with your full name, address, and the date of your supposed property purchase? Supposed? Rebecca raised an eyebrow. You mean the property purchase that actually happened where I actually bought an actual house with actual money? Patricia jumped back into the conversation. Harold, she's getting defensive. Classic scammer behavior. They always get aggressive when you ask for documentation. Rebecca looked around the marina, hoping this was some kind of elaborate prank and someone would jump out with cameras. But no, this was apparently her real life now. Two grown adults were seriously convinced she was running some kind of boat-launching con game. Look, folks, I appreciate that you take your community responsibilities seriously, but this is getting a little out of hand. I'm not a scammer, I'm not a criminal, and I'm definitely not trying to steal access to your marina. I just want to go fishing. Harold finished writing something in his notebook and looked up. We've had 3 attempted break-ins this year alone. People pretending to be residents trying to use our pool, our tennis courts, even our walking trails. We can't be too careful. Break-ins? Rebecca couldn't hide her amusement. Is that what you call this? Someone trying to launch a fishing boat in broad daylight? The best con artists operate in plain sight, Patricia declared with the confidence of someone who'd clearly watched too many true crime shows. They act normal, they have stories ready. They even bring props. She gestured toward Rebecca's boat like it was evidence in a murder trial. Before Rebecca could respond, 2 more people appeared on the scene. A woman in her 60s wearing a visor and carrying a clipboard, and a younger man in golf attire who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Patricia called an emergency board meeting. The woman announced breathlessly, "I'm Dorothy Walsh, Secretary-Treasurer. What's the situation?" Patricia immediately launched into a dramatic retelling of events that bore only a passing resemblance to reality. According to her version, Rebecca had aggressively confronted her, refused to provide legitimate documentation, and was now attempting to intimidate board members with threats. Rebecca listened to this fictional account with growing amazement. Threats? When did I threaten anyone? You said you were going to call people, Patricia shot back. That sounds like a threat to me. I offered to call my real estate agent to verify my purchase. How is that threatening? The man in golf attire, who'd introduced himself as Kevin Murphy, board member at large, stepped forward. Ma'am, maybe we can all take a step back here. This doesn't have to be confrontational. Rebecca felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone reasonable. Thank you. That's all I've been trying to say. But Kevin's next words crushed that hope. If you could just provide proper documentation and go through the correct approval process, I'm sure we can resolve this by sometime next week. Next week? Rebecca stared at him. It's Saturday morning. I want to go fishing today. On the lake that's right there, in the boat that I own, from the community where I live. Dorothy was busily scribbling notes on her clipboard. We'll need to file an incident report, of course. Any unauthorized use of community facilities has to be documented for our insurance purposes. Unauthorized use? I live here. Rebecca was starting to feel like she'd fallen into some alternate dimension where basic logic didn't apply. Harold held up his camera. I'm going to need to photograph your vehicle and boat for our records. Standard procedure for any security incident. Security incident? Rebecca watched in disbelief as Harold started taking pictures of her truck and trailer from multiple angles. You're treating me like I'm robbing a bank. I'm trying to launch a fishing boat. Patricia consulted her folder again, flipping through what appeared to be several dozen pages of rules and regulations. According to Section 15 of our community guidelines, any watercraft over 16 feet requires pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Your boat appears to exceed that length. Rebecca looked at her perfectly ordinary fishing boat. It's 20 feet long. It's white. It has a motor. What exactly needs to be reviewed by an architectural committee? Color coordination with community aesthetics, environmental impact assessment, noise level compliance, and visual obstruction analysis. Dorothy read from her clipboard like she was reciting scripture. Visual obstruction analysis? Rebecca repeated slowly. For a boat that's going to be on the water? When it's trailered in and out of the community, it could potentially block sightlines or create traffic flow issues, Harold explained seriously, still snapping photos. Kevin nodded gravely. We had a situation last year where someone's jet ski trailer scraped against the Hendersons' mailbox. Could have been a major liability. Issue. Rebecca was beginning to understand that she'd stumbled into the kind of homeowners association that probably had regulations about what color flowers people could plant and how high their grass was allowed to grow, the kind where perfectly normal activities became major federal cases requiring committees, documentation and probably notarized forms in triplicate. Okay, let me ask you this, Rebecca said, trying one more reasonable approach. What would it take for me to use the marina today? Right now, what's the absolute minimum requirement to launch my boat? The 4 board members exchanged glances like she'd asked them to solve world hunger. Well, Patricia began slowly, you'd need proof of residency, of course. Official proof, not just papers anyone could print at home. And architectural approval for the watercraft, Dorothy added. Plus insurance verification and safety inspection documentation. Harold chimed in. And you'd have to pay the boat registration fee to the HOA, Kevin finished. Rebecca blinked. Boat registration fee? To the HOA? $50 annually plus a $25 processing fee, Patricia said proudly. It helps fund marina maintenance and security. Security? Rebecca looked around the quiet marina where the biggest threat appeared to be a family of ducks swimming near the boat ramp. We hired a security company last month, Harold explained. Too many unauthorized individuals trying to access our facilities. Rebecca was starting to see the big picture. This wasn't really about rules or safety or community standards. This was about a group of people who'd appointed themselves the guardians of a small kingdom. And she was the unfortunate peasant who dared to approach without properly bowing and scraping first. You know what? Rebecca said finally. I think we're at an impasse here. You're convinced I'm some kind of criminal mastermind. And I'm convinced you're all completely out of your minds. So what happens now? Patricia smiled for the first time that morning, and it wasn't a friendly expression. Now we secure the area until proper authorities can sort this out. Rebecca stared at Patricia, trying to process what she'd just heard. Secure the area? What does that even mean? Harold was already walking toward her truck, still carrying his camera and notebook like he was conducting an official investigation. It means we're going to prevent any further unauthorized activity until this situation can be properly resolved through legal channels. Legal channels? Rebecca felt like she'd stepped into some bizarre alternate reality. You're talking about calling lawyers because I want to go fishing? Dorothy was furiously scribbling on her clipboard, documenting every word of the conversation. We have to protect the community's interests. If word gets out that just anyone can use our facilities, property values could plummet. Kevin looked uncomfortable but nodded along. The board has to consider the bigger picture. We can't set a precedent that rules don't matter. Rebecca watched Harold circle her truck and boat trailer, taking photographs from every possible angle. He was treating her fishing boat like it was evidence at a crime scene. Mr. Stevens, exactly what are you documenting there? Vehicle identification, trailer specifications, boat registration numbers, and any potential safety violations, Harold replied without looking up from his camera. Standard security protocol. Safety violations. Rebecca looked at her perfectly legal, properly registered boat and trailer. What safety violations? Patricia consulted her folder again, flipping through pages with the dedication of someone searching for gold. Well, for starters, your trailer hitch appears to be missing a safety chain backup system. Rebecca glanced at her truck. The safety chains were clearly visible, properly attached, and exactly where they should be. The safety chains are right there. Not according to subsection 12 of our community safety standards, Patricia declared triumphantly. All trailered vehicles must have redundant safety systems meeting or exceeding state requirements. Those chains exceed state requirements, Rebecca said slowly, wondering if she was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. They're rated for twice the weight of my boat. Harold finished his photography session and walked back to the group. I've documented everything. Now we need to discuss immediate containment measures. Containment measures? Rebecca repeated. You're talking about my fishing boat like it's a toxic waste spill. Dorothy looked up from her clipboard. Any unauthorized watercraft poses potential liability risks to the community. We have to minimize exposure until proper verification can be completed. Rebecca was starting to feel like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. Except instead of a Mad Hatter, she'd found herself surrounded by the Mad Homeowners Association. Let me get this straight. You want to contain my boat because it might be a liability risk? Exactly. Patricia beamed like Rebecca had finally grasped a complex mathematical concept. I'm so glad you understand. I don't understand anything about this situation, Rebecca admitted. But I'm starting to get the feeling that understanding isn't really the point here. Kevin stepped forward, clearly trying to play the role of reasonable mediator. Look, ma'am, nobody wants to make this more complicated than it has to be. But we have procedures for a reason. If we let one person skip the process, then everyone will expect special treatment. Special treatment? Rebecca stared at him. I'm asking to launch a boat at a marina. That's literally what marinas are for. Our marina, Patricia corrected sharply. For our residents, who follow our rules. Harold had pulled out what appeared to be an official form and was filling it out with the same meticulous care most people reserved for tax documents. I'm initiating a temporary security hold on the vessel in question, pending verification of ownership and community standing. Rebecca blinked slowly. A security hold? You're putting a security hold on my boat? It's a standard procedure, Dorothy assured her, as if that somehow made it less insane. We used the same process last month when someone tried to use our community pool without proper guest registration. Someone tried to swim without filling out paperwork. A teenager, Patricia said darkly, claimed he was visiting his grandmother, but we couldn't verify the relationship or confirm that proper guest protocols had been followed. Rebecca was beginning to understand that this wasn't really about her boat, her residency, or even community rules. This was about a group of people who'd found a way to feel important by creating problems where none existed, then heroically solving those problems through the application of more rules. Okay, Rebecca said, taking a deep breath. Let's say I agree to go through whatever process you want. How long would that take? The 4 board members exchanged glances again, and Rebecca could practically see them calculating how much bureaucratic drama they could extract from the situation. Well, Harold began thoughtfully, first you'd need to submit a formal application to the Architectural Review Committee. They meet every other Thursday. Next meeting is in 10 days, Dorothy added helpfully. Then there's a 30-day comment period for community input, Patricia continued. Comment period? Rebecca felt her eyes start to twitch. What kind of comments? Neighbors get to weigh in on whether your proposed watercraft usage aligns with community values and aesthetic standards. Kevin explained like this was perfectly normal. My fishing boat has to align with community values. Everything has to align with community values, Patricia said firmly. That's what makes Lakeside Estates special. Harold had finished filling out his form and was now approaching Rebecca's truck with what appeared to be some kind of official-looking sticker. I'm placing this vessel under temporary administrative hold pending completion of the approval process. Rebecca watched in growing disbelief as Harold actually attached a bright orange sticker to her boat trailer. The sticker read, Property secured, Lakeside Estates HOA, unauthorized removal prohibited. You're actually doing this, Rebecca said quietly. You're actually putting a sticker on my boat and telling me I can't use it. It's not personal, Dorothy assured her kindly. We're just following established protocols. Protocols for what? Preventing residents from using facilities they pay for? Patricia's expression hardened. Protocols for maintaining order and protecting property values. Some people seem to think they can just do whatever they want without regard for community standards. Harold was now doing something even more unbelievable. He'd produced a heavy-duty chain and lock from his car and was actually securing Rebecca's boat trailer to a concrete post near the marina office. Mr. Stevens, Rebecca said very carefully, are you chaining my boat to that post? Temporary security measure, Harold replied matter-of-factly as if he locked up people's property every day. Can't have unauthorized vehicles moving around the community. Rebecca stood perfectly still for a long moment, watching Harold secure the lock and test the chain. In her 15 years of law enforcement, she'd seen people do incredibly stupid things. She'd arrested drunk drivers who insisted they were totally fine to drive. She'd dealt with burglars who called 911 to complain that their victims had better security than expected. She'd even handled a case where someone tried to rob a bank while wearing a name tag. But this was something entirely new. 4 otherwise intelligent adults had just convinced themselves that chaining up a resident's boat was not only reasonable, but necessary for the good of the community. There, Harold announced with satisfaction, pocketing the key. The situation is now secure, Patricia smiled brightly. You can retrieve your property once you've completed the proper approval process and paid all applicable fees. Dorothy held out a business card. Our Architectural Review Committee chair is Mrs. Henderson. You can reach her office on weekdays between 10 and noon. Kevin patted Rebecca's shoulder like he was consoling her after a minor disappointment. I know it seems like a lot of red tape, but you'll appreciate the process once you understand how it protects everyone's investment. Rebecca looked at her boat, now chained to a concrete post like some kind of maritime prisoner. She looked at the 4 board members, all of whom seemed genuinely pleased with their morning's work. She looked at the beautiful lake where other boats were already out enjoying the perfect weather. And then she started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh or an amused laugh. It was the kind of laugh that happens when reality becomes so absurd that the human brain just gives up trying to process it rationally. You know what? Rebecca said finally, wiping tears from her eyes. You win. You've officially created the most ridiculous situation I've encountered in my entire adult life. Congratulations. Patricia beamed like she'd just won a community service award. We're just doing our job. Rebecca walked back to her truck, leaving her chained-up boat behind. As she drove away, she could see the 4 board members in her rearview mirror, standing proudly next to their conquest like hunters posing with a trophy. She pulled out her phone and speed-dialed her partner at work. Mike, it's Rebecca. You're not going to believe what just happened to me. Detective Mike Rodriguez nearly choked on his coffee when Rebecca finished telling him about her morning adventure. They were sitting in the break room at Riverside Police Department, and Mike was staring at his boss like she'd just told him she'd been abducted by aliens. Chief, let me make sure I've got this straight, Mike said slowly. The HOA president literally chained your boat to a concrete post because she doesn't believe you live in your own house? That's the simplified version, but yeah, pretty much. Rebecca took a sip of her own coffee and shook her head. And the whole time they're treating me like I'm some kind of master criminal running an elaborate boat launching scam. Did you tell them who you are? Rebecca had been wondering about that herself all weekend. I thought about it, but honestly, I was so stunned by the whole thing that I just wanted to see how far they'd actually go. Plus, I've learned over the years that pulling the cop card too early sometimes makes situations worse. Well, it can't get much worse than having your boat imprisoned by a homeowners association. Mike pulled out his phone. Want me to drive over there and straighten them out? Not yet. I'm curious about something first. Rebecca stood up and walked over to her computer. Let me run a few searches and see what else our friends at Lakeside Estates have been up to. What Rebecca found over the next hour made the boat incident look like a minor misunderstanding. The computer system showed 17 different calls to police dispatch from Lakeside Estates in the past 6 months, all of them involving Patricia Stevens or her husband Harold. Look at this, Rebecca called Mike over to her screen. March 15th. Patricia called about suspicious individuals using the community walking trails. Turned out to be a family from 3 streets over taking their kids for a walk. That's not too bad, Mike said, reading over her shoulder. April 2nd. Harold reported a break-in at the community pool. Officers responded to find a maintenance worker who'd been hired by the HOA board to clean the filters. Rebecca scrolled down. April 28th, Patricia called about illegal parking in the visitor spaces. The illegally parked car belonged to a home health nurse caring for an elderly resident. Mike whistled low. These people have been busy. It gets better. May 16th, noise complaint about construction work happening outside permitted hours. The construction work was emergency roof repair after a storm damaged 3 houses. Rebecca kept scrolling. June 4th, report of unauthorized solicitation. The unauthorized solicitor was a Girl Scout selling cookies. They called the cops on a Girl Scout? Gets worse. Look at this one from last month. Rebecca pointed to a particularly long incident report. Harold filed a formal complaint about dangerous driving in the community. Claimed someone was speeding recklessly through the neighborhood and endangering residents. Mike read the report and started laughing. The dangerous driver was Mrs. Thompson from Maple Street, age 74, driving 15 miles per hour in a 25 zone because she was looking for her escaped cat. The officer who responded wrote in his notes that Harold followed Mrs. Thompson for 6 blocks, taking pictures of her license plate before calling 911. Rebecca shook her head. These people have turned community watch into a full-time occupation. Detective Lisa Park walked into the break room and overheard the conversation. Are you talking about those nut jobs from Lakeside Estates? Please tell me they haven't filed another complaint about teenagers existing in public spaces. You've dealt with them too? Rebecca asked. Oh yeah. Last month they called because some kids were playing basketball in the community court after 8 p.m. Apparently there's a noise ordinance that prohibits recreational activities after sunset. Lisa grabbed a soda from the refrigerator. The kids were the board president's own grandchildren visiting for the weekend. Rebecca pulled up the incident report. Patricia Stevens called noise complaints on her own grandkids. She said rules apply to everyone equally, even family members. The kids' parents packed up and left that same night. Lisa shook her head. I felt bad for those kids. They were just trying to have fun. Mike was still reading through the computer reports. Chief, this is starting to look like a pattern of harassment. These people are using police resources to settle personal grudges and power trips. That's exactly what it is, Rebecca agreed. And I have a feeling the boat incident is just the latest escalation. She spent the rest of Monday morning making discreet phone calls to other residents of Lakeside Estates. What she discovered painted a picture of a community living under the thumb of an increasingly authoritarian HOA board that seemed to view every resident as a potential rule breaker. Mrs. Johnson, from Pine Street, had received 3 citations for having the wrong shade of mulch in her flower beds. The approved color was natural brown, but apparently her mulch was deemed reddish-brown and therefore in violation of community standards. Mr. Foster had been fined $200 for leaving his garbage cans visible from the street for more than 4 hours after pickup. He worked night shifts and was asleep when the garbage truck came. The HOA board suggested he hire someone to move his cans for him. The Martinez family had been threatened with legal action for installing a swing set in their backyard without architectural approval. The swing set was for their 5-year-old daughter, and identical to 3 others already approved in the neighborhood. But the most disturbing story came from Betty Chen, an elderly widow who lived alone on Oak Ridge Drive, just 2 houses down from Rebecca's new place. "They've been making my life miserable for months," Betty told Rebecca over the phone. "First it was my garden. Too many flowers, they said. Then it was my bird feeders. Apparently they attract wildlife, which violates some environmental protection clause." Environmental protection clause? Rebecca was taking notes now. "Last week they told me I couldn't have my grandson visit anymore because his car doesn't meet community vehicle standards. It's a perfectly good Honda, but it's more than 10 years old." Betty's voice started to shake. "I've lived in this house for 23 years. I helped write the original HOA bylaws when this place was first built. But now I feel like a prisoner in my own home." Rebecca felt her anger building as she listened to story after story of petty harassment and bureaucratic bullying. These weren't isolated incidents or misunderstandings. This was a systematic campaign by people who'd appointed themselves the rulers of a small kingdom and were drunk on their own authority. "Mrs. Chen," Rebecca said carefully, "have you considered filing complaints with the city about HOA overreach?" Who would listen? They're very official, very organized. They have lawyers and paperwork for everything. I'm just one old lady who doesn't understand community standards." After hanging up, Rebecca sat quietly for several minutes, thinking about what she'd learned. In her career, she'd dealt with bullies of all kinds. Schoolyard bullies who picked on smaller kids, workplace bullies who used their positions to intimidate subordinates, domestic bullies who terrorized their families behind closed doors. But the Lakeside Estates HOA board represented a special kind of bullying. They'd created an entire system of rules and procedures that allowed them to harass people while hiding behind the pretense of community service. They were ruining people's lives and convincing themselves they were heroes doing it. Rebecca picked up her phone and called Mike into her office. "I want you to pull every incident report, every complaint and every interaction we've had with anyone from Lakeside Estates over the past 2 years," she told him. "I have a feeling this rabbit hole goes deeper than we thought." Mike raised an eyebrow. "You thinking about taking official action?" Rebecca looked out her window toward the direction of the lake, where her boat was still chained up like a piece of evidence in some imaginary crime. "I'm thinking about a lot of things," she said quietly. "But first I want to understand exactly what kind of operation these people are running over there." 2 hours later, Mike returned with a stack of reports that was thicker than most criminal case files. As Rebecca read through incident after incident of petty harassment, disguised as community protection, she realized that what had happened to her wasn't personal. It was just business as usual for people who'd forgotten that being on an HOA board was supposed to be about serving the community, not ruling it. The question now was what she was going to do about it. Saturday morning arrived with the same perfect weather that had started this whole mess a week earlier. Rebecca stood in her kitchen, sipping coffee and looking out at Crystal Lake, where other residents were already enjoying their boats while hers remained chained up like a piece of confiscated evidence. She'd spent the week gathering information and making phone calls, and what she'd discovered had convinced her that the Lakeside Estates HOA board needed a reality check, not as a police chief flexing her authority, but as a resident who was tired of watching her neighbors get bullied by people who'd forgotten what community leadership actually meant. Detective Rodriguez pulled into her driveway right on schedule, followed by Officer Janet Walsh in her personal car. Rebecca had asked them to come along as witnesses, not as police officers, What was about to happen needed to be handled carefully. "You sure you want to do this, Chief?" Mike asked as they walked toward the marina. "These people are going to lose their minds when they figure out who you are." "That's exactly why I'm doing it this way," Rebecca replied. "If I'd badged them last week, they would have backed down out of fear, not understanding. They need to learn that their behavior has consequences, not just avoid it because they got caught by someone with authority." Officer Walsh chuckled. "I still can't believe they chained up your boat. I've been a cop for 8 years, and that's definitely a first." As they approached the marina, Rebecca could see the now familiar sight of Patricia Stevens conducting her weekly security patrol. She was accompanied by Harold and 2 other board members, all of them carrying clipboards and wearing expressions of grim determination. Patricia spotted Rebecca first and immediately went into alert mode. "Harold, she's back. The boatwoman is back." Harold fumbled for his camera while the other board members formed what appeared to be a defensive line between Rebecca and the marina. It was like watching a very slow, very bureaucratic version of a Western showdown. "Mrs. Stevens," Rebecca called out pleasantly as they approached. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" "Don't try to be friendly," Patricia snapped, clutching her ever-present folder. "You're trespassing on private property, and we have photographic evidence of your previous unauthorized activities." Rebecca nodded toward her still-chained boat. "I can see you've been taking good care of my property." "That's very thoughtful of you." Harold stepped forward with his camera ready. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you and your associates to leave the premises immediately. This is a restricted area." "Associates?" Mike grinned and pulled out his phone. "I like that. Makes us sound very official." Dorothy Walsh, the HOA secretary, was furiously scribbling on her clipboard. "I'm documenting this entire interaction for our legal team. Any threats or intimidation will be reported to the appropriate authorities." "The appropriate authorities?" Officer Walsh repeated with barely concealed amusement. "That's interesting. Which authorities would those be?" "The police, obviously," Patricia declared. "We've had to call them several times about security issues in our community." Rebecca exchanged glances with Mike and Janet. "Really? How did that work out for you?" Harold was still taking pictures, apparently trying to document them into submission. "Very well, actually. The officers were very professional and understood our concerns about unauthorized individuals trying to access our facilities." "Unauthorized individuals," Rebecca repeated thoughtfully. "That's an interesting way to describe your neighbors." Kevin Murphy, the 4th board member, looked uncomfortable but stayed in formation with the others. "Ma'am, we're not trying to be unreasonable here, but rules exist for a reason, and we can't make exceptions just because someone finds the process inconvenient." "The process?" Rebecca mused. "You mean the process where you chain up someone's property and tell them they can't use facilities they pay for unless they submit to an architectural review for a fishing boat?" Patricia's face was turning red. "It's not about the boat. It's about respect for community standards and following proper procedures." "Proper procedures," Rebecca nodded slowly. "Like calling the police on Girl Scouts selling cookies? Or filing noise complaints about your own grandchildren playing basketball?" The 4 board members went very quiet. Patricia's grip on her folder tightened visibly. "How do you know about that?" Harold asked suspiciously. "Oh, I know about a lot of things," Rebecca replied calmly. "I know about Mrs. Johnson's allegedly non-compliant mulch. I know about Mr. Foster's garbage can crisis. I know about the Martinez family's unauthorized swing set emergency." Dorothy stopped writing and looked up from her clipboard. "Have you been investigating us?" "In a manner of speaking." Rebecca pulled out her own folder, much thicker than Patricia's. "See? I've spent the week talking to residents, reviewing incident reports, and trying to understand exactly what kind of operation you folks are running here." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "What kind of operation?" "We're protecting property values and maintaining community standards. Someone has to care about these things." "Someone does care," Rebecca agreed. "The question is whether that someone should be terrorizing elderly widows and filing false police reports." "False police reports?" Harold sputtered. "Every complaint we've filed has been legitimate." Mike stepped forward with his phone, which had been recording the entire conversation. "Actually, let's talk about those police reports. Because I've read every single one." "You've read police reports?" Kevin asked, confused. "How did you get access to police reports?" "Same way she got information about our community activities," Patricia said darkly. "They're probably working with some kind of legal team." I knew this was bigger than just one unauthorized boat. Rebecca smiled. You're right that this is bigger than one boat. It's about a pattern of harassment and abuse of authority that's been going on for months. Harassment? Dorothy protested. We're volunteers trying to maintain community standards. Let me ask you something, Rebecca continued. When you called police about Mrs. Thompson driving 15 miles per hour while looking for her cat, did you really believe she was endangering the community? Or were you just mad that someone wasn't following your idea of proper traffic procedures? Harold shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't maintaining proper lane discipline. She was driving slowly and carefully while trying to find her lost pet. Officer Walsh interjected. The officer who responded said it was the most ridiculous call he'd ever received. How do you know what the officer said? Patricia demanded. Janet smiled and pulled out her badge. Because I read his report. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Patricia's mouth fell open. Harold nearly dropped his camera and Dorothy's pen froze over her clipboard. You're police officers? Kevin whispered. Mike nodded and showed his badge as well. Detective Rodriguez, Riverside PD, and this is Officer Walsh. Patricia's eyes darted between the three of them, her brain clearly working overtime trying to process this new information. Then who? What are you? Rebecca reached into her jacket and pulled out her badge and credentials. Police Chief Rebecca Chen, Riverside Police Department. And your new neighbor. The silence that followed was so complete that Rebecca could hear a boat engine starting up somewhere across the lake. Patricia's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a pale green that suggested she might be sick. Harold slowly lowered his camera. You're the police chief. I am indeed. Rebecca put her badge away and smiled pleasantly. And I have to say, Mrs. Stevens, you and your board have provided me with one of the most educational weeks of my career. Dorothy dropped her clipboard entirely. Oh my God, we chained up the police chief's boat. You did indeed. Rebecca walked over to where her boat was still secured to the concrete post. And I have to admit I'm impressed by your commitment. Most people would have just called it a misunderstanding and backed down by now. Patricia finally found her voice. We didn't know. You should have identified yourself. Why? Rebecca asked, genuinely curious. Would you have treated me differently if you'd known I was a police officer? Because that would suggest you knew your behavior was inappropriate all along. Harold was frantically trying to unlock the chain with shaking hands. This is all just a big misunderstanding. We were just trying to protect the community. From what? Officer Walsh asked. From residents trying to use facilities they pay for? From children playing in playgrounds? From elderly women feeding birds in their own yards? Kevin looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Chief Chen, we had no idea who you were. If you had known, you would have let me launch my boat. Rebecca finished. But you would have gone right back to harassing Mrs. Johnson about her mulch and Mrs. Chen about her bird feeders. The problem isn't that you didn't recognize me. The problem is that you think this kind of behavior is acceptable at all. Patricia was still clutching her folder, but her aggressive stance had completely deflated. We were just following procedures. We have responsibilities to the community. You have responsibilities to serve the community, Rebecca corrected, not rule it. There's a difference between leadership and bullying, and you've been firmly on the wrong side of that line. Harold finally got the lock open and quickly unwound the chain from Rebecca's boat trailer. There, all set. No harm done. Rebecca looked at her boat, then at the 4 board members who were now avoiding eye contact like guilty children. Actually, there has been harm done. You've made people afraid to live in their own homes. You've turned neighbors against each other. You've wasted police resources with frivolous complaints. And you've convinced yourselves that being petty tyrants makes you community heroes. Dorothy picked up her clipboard with trembling hands. What? What happens now? Now? Rebecca walked back to her truck and started unhitching the boat trailer. Now you're going to think very carefully about whether you want to continue serving the community or whether you want to keep playing power games with people's lives. Patricia straightened up, some of her old defiance returning. You can't threaten us. We're elected board members. I'm not threatening anyone, Rebecca replied calmly. I'm simply pointing out that every frivolous police report, every harassment complaint, and every abuse of your authority is documented and public record. If you want to continue down this path, that's your choice. But now you know that the police department is very much aware of your activities. She finished securing her boat and climbed into her truck. Oh, and Mrs. Stevens, Next time you want to play security guard, you might want to make sure you actually know what security looks like. As Rebecca drove toward the boat ramp with Mike and Janet following behind, she could see the 4 board members in her rearview mirror, standing in stunned silence next to the concrete post where her boat had been chained for a week. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Think they learned their lesson? Rebecca smiled and typed back, "We'll find out. But something tells me the next HOA meeting is going to be very interesting." An hour later, she was finally anchored in a quiet cove on Crystal Lake, coffee in one hand and fishing rod in the other, enjoying the peaceful morning she'd been trying to have for a week. In the distance, she could see other boats enjoying the perfect weather, their owners blissfully unaware that they'd just witnessed the end of the lakeside estate's reign of terror. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Betty Chen, the elderly widow who lived 2 houses down. "Dear, I just heard the most wonderful news about our HOA board meeting some new neighbors this morning. I think things are about to get much better around here." Rebecca smiled and cast her line into the clear water. Sometimes justice came from courtrooms and legal proceedings. Sometimes it came from good police work and careful investigation. And sometimes it came from a fishing boat, a chain, and 4 people who finally realized they weren't as important as they thought they were.